Hi, I'm Reagen Evans and I'm a couture women's wear designer. Today I'm going to be taking you through 4 common mistakes when draping and how to avoid them. My first point will be not to forget your grain lines. So firstly, I'll just show you the 3 main grain lines that there are. To start with, you have your straight of grain, which runs parallel with your selvage edge. This is also indicated on all of your patterns with the long line with the S through the middle. After that, we have our cross grain, which is also known as the weft. The easiest way to remember this is weft is left towards the selvage, and your straight of grain is known as your warp. On top of these 2 grain lines, we have our bias line. This is 45 degrees from your straight of grain. Your bias is best known for having bounce and adding movement to your fabric, so it's perfect for draping. Your straight of grain doesn't have much movement, and neither does your weft, as they're both 90 degrees from each other on the loom, but your bias goes diagonally across the fabric, allowing for a stretch in the fabric. So in order to illustrate this, I'm going to pop this on the mannequin, and if you wanted to create a cowl neck top, you can see that using the straight of grain isn't going to work. You can see that the fabric is far too crinkly and is not aesthetically pleasing at all for the design. If I now switch this to the bias, ignoring this part, but the main part that's on the bias is more of a curvature and you don't have the points like you do in the straight of grain. The fabric is flowing straight the way around. My next tip would be don't fix your draping to the mannequin if it's extremely intricate. So when we're draping, we can often add a lot of components to our piece of work that we've got on the stand, and we're very tempted to shove as many pins as possible into the mannequin to get it exactly where we want it to be. The only trouble with this is when you need to take it back off to create your patterns, you have to completely take it apart and it often doesn't go back together as you planned. So an example of this would be if we're making the top of a gown, for example, and we want to pleat the sections and everything is pleated on top of each other. What you're doing here is stabbing them straight into the mannequin. But when you need to take this off, especially if you've cut panels or you've added another layer of fabric to this, you've got separate pieces that are going to separate and you're not going to know where to connect them back together. So when pleating in particular, you would usually pin so that it's free from the mannequin. So you would pin these pleats together so that it's still free, and then you can use another pin to hold those in place. Another tip would be to create a corset or a base layer, which is something I do often in my gowns, and then I will drape on top of that so that I can remove it from the mannequin and fix those in place by hand. My third tip would be don't let the mannequin limit you. So when draping on the stand and being up close and personal with the 3D form, it's really tempting to try and follow the curve of the stand. We often try to make things bodycon and as tight as possible, but we can avoid doing this by stepping back. The entire purpose of draping is you would create things that you can't really design by drawing, and it's about taking things away from 2D shapes and being flat. You can really have fun with it and pin your material in different places that you might not necessarily think to draw, and just see where the design takes you. Just by manipulating the fabric slightly and placing it in pleats over the shoulder, I've created this shoulder ruffle that you can develop into a sleeve. You could also mimic this on the back and create a big bow. It's all about having fun with the fabric that you've chosen and trying to make it as 3D as possible. So sometimes when you have your fabric sat in front of you on the table and it's flat, it can be a bit lifeless. This does sort of overlap with the lesson previous, where we can add texture and we can do things to the fabric before we even start draping with it. So to give you an example, I have my flat fabric here. If I drape this over the shoulder, and I don't always drape straight onto the shoulder, you can start on the hip, you can do anything really. Again, you'd know by doing this, these lines need to sit on the bias grain. So once you've got your 3D structure in there, you could grab feather trims, you can grab ruffles. I've made a couple of ruffles here just for example. You could have these down your neckline. And the thing with having trims like this that you can just attach and move around if they don't work is it's super easy, and as long as you have your base there, you can change the look of your garment completely. So we have one, you could add another one to add a little bit more depth, and if you then imagine this mirrored, you're going to have a big statement neckline. You could take them off and keep a very sleek neckline and maybe add your smaller trim into your pleats. This could be feathers, it could be absolutely anything you want to add into there just to give it a 3D form. You could make this all super fitted, obviously making sure that it all fits properly, and you'd know that you need to have a seam on the inside of here to attach that trim into. These are all the things that you start to engineer and know in advance before you even start making anything. I would know that this needs to have a seam to be caught into so that it doesn't just fall out. And purposely by placing things in different areas, you're already calculating in your head how you're going to construct the piece. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Please subscribe to this channel. If you want to learn more about me and my processes, take a look at my course on Domestika. You'll find the link in the description below.